5.5, second reading, adopt ordinance amending Chapter 5, Section 6 of the Lake County Code, adding Section 6.25 relating to exempt agricultural building permitting for temporary hoop structures for commercial cannabis. And Supervisor Sabatier has pulled this item.
So I just wanted to make some comments. I have no issues with the draft ordinance. I have not received any potential issues. The fire districts kind of threw a code at us last time, which I was not aware of that code in our conversations about 4290. I just want to make sure that we have a legal review of that. I'm not certain that fire chiefs went through legal in order to understand how that connects. Their code was based on buildings and facility. Buildings, the definition speaks to a structure that you move into. And talks about occupancy, and I don't believe we're putting a maximum occupancy on each hoop house to say how many people can fit in there safely. That would be more of a public place, that would be more of a home, that would be more of an actual place where you're meant to occupy. The idea of ag exempt is that you're not supposed to occupy. You're supposed to store things, you're supposed to drop off things. So I'm not going to speak legally that I know exactly where it fits, but I just want to make sure that we have a legal background on understanding how 503.1.1 interacts with this. I also had some questions that I asked of CDD. At this moment in time, from my understanding, based on the conversations, and I feel we kind of opened a little bit of a can of worms, and I hope we can seal it back up as quickly as possible, was that anything over 120 square feet requires a permit, unless it's an ag exempt, which is still a permit, but a different type of permit. And so at this moment, we're looking at a commercial cannabis hoop structure ordinance and not a agriculture hoop structure ordinance, which means that anything over 120 square feet at this moment in time would require a building permit. And I would love for CDD to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe based on our conversations that that's correct. And so the reason I say that is, let's get to a point where we can seal that back up, because it makes no sense to me that cannabis is offered this opportunity, granted with certain regulations that maybe traditional ag doesn't want, but I would love for ag to come back and as quickly as possible and work with our team to kind of close up that hole and put that worm back in the can. I don't think you say that, but anyways. And then the last one was, somebody did mention the farmland protection zone. It was a little odd for me that we're talking about all these regulations for hoop structures, but we've never had a conversation about hoop structure regulations when we forced people who were transitioning from outdoor to indoor or mixed light in our farmland protection zone. They were forced to have hoop houses. I've never heard of anyone having to deal with any regulations or any issues before. That's a moot point, but I'm kind of curious what's happening with those folks, because it sounds like the deadline may be May 27th. What's happening with the folks who have submitted applications for transition, but have yet to go through the entire process to be able to transition? Will they have a potential extension? Are they going to have to be placed on hold until they finish their transition? I just was curious as to how that's going to be handled, since we were forcing them in hoop houses, and now it seems that there may be something different. Those were my only comments and questions.
Thank you, Supervisor Sabatier. Mireya Turner, Director of Community Development. If I could just seek a little bit of clarification about jamming that worm in or out of the can. Make sure I understand what your intent is, that staff work with representatives from non-cannabis agriculture to find a way that they could also qualify then for the ag exempt building permit for the temporary hoop house use for agriculture.
And I believe in our last meeting, and I'm sorry that I wasn't very clear. I do that sometimes. Last meeting, we had requested that ag work continue to work to come back with some sort of temporary hoop house structure ordinance for the fact that right now there is nothing to cover them, and it makes no sense that cannabis is covered but not traditional ag. So hopefully that cleared up. I believe there was a request by the board to do so and continue those conversations either last week or the week before. We've had a few conversations regarding.
Last week, a lot of the discussion was regarding the section of the old resolution for coming back with generalized road standards. So if the board's intent is to direct staff, since you can't direct ag, except for the agricultural commissioner, but if that's the board's consensus, then I'll start working with our agricultural commissioner, Catherine Vanderwall, and see where that goes.
And I believe, again, it was a direction 2 weeks ago, not last week, because I think last week was more dealing with our fire districts who didn't show up the week before. I think the first week was more of a, let's get rid of ag and only make it cannabis. And then that's why it was requested that we continue to have the conversation with ag. And please, board, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that was the direction that was provided.
From what I recall, I think the intent was to come to something at some point, but I don't think we gave direction to start working on it immediately.
Yeah, that's the way I recall it, too. It definitely needs to come back, but trying to finalize this conversation before we add something else on it, that's the way I perceived it.
And I don't mean to say immediately, I don't know that I used that word, but if I was ag, I would be pushing, and we can't control ag, but just the fact that now they're in a gray area, or not a gray area, they're in an area that I think they weren't intending or planning to be in, that.
I'd be happy to reach out to our agricultural commissioner as well as the director of the Farm Bureau and get a dialogue started to see what sort of interest there is on that side.
Yeah, but we also want to be mindful of all the priorities that you have given us earlier
really
this year.
appreciate
And
that.
we don't want you to have to be distracted.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Because those are our top priorities.
And our cannabis task force will continue doing their work as well, so nothing will get side-railed or sidelined. We have, on the FPZ side of your question, we have 18 projects that were approved within the Farmland Protection Zone. According to Ordinance 3103, those projects were given a 2-year transition period, during which they could use temporary hoop houses, but at the end of which they were to convert into mixed light indoor or greenhouses with filtration systems. So far, we have only 4 of those 17 that have not turned in plans to convert. So I have heard some dialogue regarding, well, will this temporary hoop structure apply to the ones in FPZ? However, if you take a look at it, the temporary hoop structure in Ordinance 3103 was offered as an option during the conversion. It was not intended to be a permanent qualification to count the same as indoor or mixed light or greenhouses, which is a solid structure with filtration systems. So I don't know that today's ordinance would apply to that, in that the 2-year transition period is actually coming to an end. So for those 4 permittees who have not submitted applications for those transition, the ordinance does state that those permits would be revoked. However, they still would all go through the revocation process, which starts with the department or the director taking an item before the planning commission for a request for revocation. But that revocation is actually up to the planning commission. And county council is welcome to correct me if I've gotten anything wrong.
That is correct.
And I agree with you, land use is primary, and land use says that they're not allowed to do outdoor within the farmland protection zone. My question was more specific to those. I didn't know it was 14 applications that submitted for transition. If
18.
If they're not done with the transition, are they going to be forced to pause their activity, or are they going to be allowed to continue in hoop houses until that transition is complete?
Good question. That one I don't think I've planned out yet, because the ordinance itself just gave specific deadlines when applications for the modification of their approved permits went into play. And then they had the 2 years to come into that transition. I would have to actually do a little more, maybe quite likely confer with county council regarding that. But either way, if they were to be added to that revocation, that takes time. It's not, I'm still working on our first one. We've got a list of like 5. So I need the staff report to go to county council for proper vetting, since this is a significant impact to revoke a use permit. So it is likely that they'd be on my list, but we won't get to them. We won't take them before the Planning Commission anytime soon.
Supervisor Green?
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank the gentleman who called me on Monday, Mr. Rodriguez. He may still be with us. The ordinance before us today, the temporary hoop house ordinance, been clearly vetted. It will apply to people, not necessarily in FPZ limbo, but the basic purpose of this ordinance, I definitely strongly support this ordinance moving forward today. I am, as to the transition for projects that were cited in FPZs and allowed to convert, I am stunned to hear this, number one, that it happened, but I've heard lots of interesting things happen with our ordinance over the years under assorted leadership. And I don't even know how to process it. So I guess at some appropriate time, I would like to hear that with board consensus to come back for a separate discussion to the extent that those people can and do need relief as it was envisioned under Ordinance 3103. I think there's a fairly simple fix that could extend the deadline, and that would take some revocation heat off, and then we could have, when we bring that proposed fix
Can
back.
we keep the conversation about today's ordinance so that we can just move through this, please?
Okay. I just learned Monday that 18 outdoor cultivation projects were approved in lands where they were not supposed to be approved. And now I think a good part of the language that came before the task force in bringing this ordinance forward was maybe some misplaced hope, but at least some hope when they were talking about this conversion process. I had no clue what was doing. Apparently, there is a good chunk of people who are looking, if they're in FPZ land, to this ordinance for relief. And we're not going to deliver that relief today, nor should we. So I can't not discuss it because it was part of the discussion bringing this ordinance forward, and because now new information is presented, that this may not be equitably applied to those people that somehow were supposed to sunset their outdoor growing operations in FPZ lands.
But that conversation might have come up in the task force meeting, but it wasn't board direction at that time. And what we're trying to finalize is this ordinance that we gave direction on and we've had several meetings on. And I'm not discounting that that is not a problem. It sounds like it is, but it's not something that is on our agenda topic today.
I would be happy to bring that item before the board in the future. The Cannabis Task Force has already discussed it, and they opted to not extend the deadline.
So question to County Council, as this ordinance is presented today, could a grower as described in our FPZ that is tasked through Ordinance 3103 and their project conditions of approval to convert, can this ordinance be used to at least temporarily satisfy the conversion to mixed light? And I would say no, because by definition, these hoop houses are considered outdoor cultivation. They would not be considered mixed light cultivation unless we had a whole different ordinance that allowed for building permits, electrical permits, and I'm not saying that we can't get there when we do revisit this, because our current definition in 27 for cannabis greenhouse conceivably could allow for a powered hoop house that is permitted, but this ordinance is designed to create temporary hoop houses that under the state law as it exists now and the state regulations as it exists now is by definition going to be outdoor cultivation. So if this ordinance is to be made available to those FPZ growers that are trying to convert, my question is this a thing? And based on my very limited understanding, because again, I just learned about this yesterday, I would say no, this will not help them convert. So when we all take a vote tonight, let's at least be clear what our common understanding is. Is this ordinance going to benefit these growers that are trying to transition, or is it not?
Well, this ordinance would apply to those who would satisfy the requirements under sections 1 and 2 of the ordinance as it's drafted now. So practical considerations on whether a certain type of area or cultivator would be able to utilize the permit that's referenced under this ordinance, it would certainly hinge on whether or not those requirements would be satisfied. And it was mentioned about, at least in its current draft, there are no, and that was the subject of discussions, in prior discussions, the electrical and mechanical equipment on these hoop houses. Those were excluded, those were not referenced in this ordinance. So certainly that would, that is not contemplated as part of the conditions and requirements in this ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
And that was made a part of the board's discussions in prior meetings.
Okay, if there's no more discussion, or do you have anything to add, Director Turner?
I was just wondering, or would appreciate confirmation if there's consensus to bring forward the discussion regarding the extension of the deadline past May 23rd to the board for its consideration.
No, I say no for me.
No, that's not on the agenda.
Then I'm clear and done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Do we have public comment on this item?
Michael Wagner, thank you guys for bringing all of this back together once again. I think that, well, to start with the agricultural community, while I do play a part in cannabis, I also am heavily involved in agriculture, mainly wine particularly, with the cannabis being able to move forward with a relatively simple, straightforward way to be able to cultivate within inside of a greenhouse or a hoop house, not allowing general ag or traditional ag to do the same would seem counterintuitive. So I think it's something we should definitely look at how to bring that about. It actually goes hand in hand with what Bruno had brought up just previously as far as small farmers and how do they maximize space, how do they get multiple generations from each season. Being able to use something quick and convenient would play a huge role, and then being able to do that as well as recycle their water and so on and so forth. Stepping away from that, the FPZ zoning and the regulations therein, if we say we have roughly 120 active permits for cannabis cultivation, when we say 18 of that 120, we're looking at 15% of everybody. So it's directly related to the ordinance that you're looking at passing today. To exclude that from the conversation would seem not intentionally done, but it's going to put 15% of these people in who are already in limbo into total limbo. So people that have filed for their update of information to do the conversion to mixed light because they fall into FPZ did rely on the idea that these hoop structures would basically cover their crops and fulfill what the point or the intent of that FPZ zoning ordinance did. With that, at late May, if you say 15% of these people now are on hold and they can't operate or move forward, that is a major effect. That's not something that can just be disregarded. It's elemental. So to say, okay, we're not going to discuss it and we're not going to bring it forward or find some way to at least address it seems irresponsible. So with that, I will close my comments. Thank you.
I just want to clarify, Maria, if you could clarify for me, there are 18, but there are only 4 that haven't done what they need to do to move forward. Was that your comment?
Yes.
Or did I hear that correct? So it's not 18. It's not irresponsible. What I think is irresponsible is not moving forward in the process that was given you. 13, yeah, right, so 18, so 14 out of the 18 have done what they need to do to help them move forward, and 4 have not applied for anything, so it just,
Correct.
that's correct, right?
Yes.
So, a large majority of that, so the 15% number you're using is completely wrong, because most of them have moved forward. There was an opportunity there, and I think that's what we're always trying to do, is give the opportunity to take the steps forward. We put timelines on these things, so it's not just ever-ending. To say that we're irresponsible, we're not irresponsible. We attempted to give an opportunity for folks in the FPZ zone to move forward, and, you know, at that point, that's where my comments come from. So we can keep extending and changing, but we got to get some stuff done, put in lines. The opportunities are given, need to be taken advantage of, and it must have been an opportunity because 14 out of the 18 did do that, so, from my understanding. So unless I'm wrong.
I have a question for you, and I guess more for Director Turner. The 14 have not yet been approved by the Planning Commission to transition to mixed light or indoor. They've just submitted their application and have been in the process of going through that process. Am I correct on that, or 14 have been fully approved?
The worksheet I got from staff said that they had been approved, but I'd have to double check on that one. Also, oh, hey, Andrew.
But, so just for
So I
clarity, mine was,
misunderstood.
they've been given a process. 14 of them have taken those steps forward. So I just wanted to clarify in the numbers, you can't just bulk all 18 together because there are folks that have taken steps forward.
Additionally, before I turn this over to the Cannabis Program Manager, I would like to bring the board's attention to the definition of mixed light in the zoning code, which does cite, or does say the cultivation of cannabis in a greenhouse, glass house, conservatory, hothouse, or other similar structure using light deprivation and/or artificial lighting below a rate of 25 watts per square foot. It does not refer to hoop house. So I'm not sure where the misunderstanding would have been then, that everyone was waiting because this would count.
No, this was only for the transition period that the
Right.
conversation should be, not for where the ultimate destination is for those that are cultivating in the farmland protection zone.
And I'll turn this over to the Cannabis Program Manager.
Yes, I just came down to clarify 2 things. Of that list of 18 that staff had put together, one of those projects was still pending, so it shouldn't be in that list. And then 2 others are processing facilities, so it wouldn't apply. So of it, we have 9 projects that are in compliance with Ordinance 3101 and 3103. 3 projects that have submitted plans and are approved for compliance, however, they have opted out. They have not actually started their operations at this point, which leaves us with our 4 projects. And while they, I think it mentioned earlier that they had not submitted plans, they have started the process. However, at this point, they're unable to complete the process of the transition. So some of them have submitted engineered plans, some of them have been approved, but they're just not going to be able to implement it at this time. That's one project. Another project had been approved for their outdoor, and then the initial study did not consider the greenhouses that would be required due to this ordinance, so they've submitted new plans. However, they haven't completed their application to submit that transition, or
And that
to
was part of
complete
the
that transition.
requirements.
Yes, as required, so.
Supervisor Green?
So when you say compliance, that means they've submitted site plans or they've executed them and brought forward completed greenhouses that have been approved?
One of them has been approved. They've submitted everything they need. The initial study that was initially circulated covered the transition. So the paperwork is there for them to move forward. They are just not in the position to move forward, is my understanding. Another had been approved, but not as part of this conversion. They've submitted some of their plans, but Public Works wants engineered drainage plans and erosion control plans, and they have been unable to provide those. And the other project is just stalled, not sure what to do. So,
But for compliance purposes, the deadline says to have it completed, not like you're halfway there and your site plans are halfway done, right? So how many?
yeah, I mean,
many
one
are-
of the
how many
four,
are
I think
done?
the, Stella Green Farms, I believe the applicant contacted you. They've been approved for their plan to go ahead and convert and meet the requirements of this ordinance. My understanding is that this year, due to the market conditions and other reasons, they're not going to be able to, construct the greenhouses as required as part of their plans that have been submitted. So they're looking for other options, potentially with the application of hoop houses, so.
And then the definition, Director Turner, you mentioned the hoop house definition, but then the cannabis, the greenhouse dash cannabis definition within the same ordinance does seem to potentially allow the use of hoop houses that in the context of mixed light greenhouse cultivation, it would be a powered hoop house. So we would distinguish, and again, the state regs have changed, but I think the definition of greenhouse cannabis within the same ordinance wisely gives us the flexibility to say a hoop house that is unpowered, as described in the ordinance before us today, can be used for outdoor cultivation. For those that may end up, like our FPZ friends here, having to transition, at least the way I'm reading our definition, and I stand ready to be corrected, allows flexibility, potentially could allow flexibility for the use of powered hoop houses with building permits, with electrical permits, with plumbing if needed, to qualify as a greenhouse that could be permitted for mixed light cultivation. Don't need to answer that today, I'm just pointing that out.
Okay. I would also like to correct one other thing. The task force did discuss the extension of the FPZ ordinance, and they did vote to extend it by 2 years. Initially, they'd considered 1 year. They wanted to add another year in case, the full ordinance would undergo environmental review. So,
Okay. So we're still in public comment, and we have a hand up, Michael Rodriguez. You can unmute and have 3 minutes. Please state your name.
Hi, I'm Michael Rodriguez with Stella Green Farms. I'm one of the farms that's being affected by this conversion. I have turned in my plans over a year ago, probably close to more than a year and a half ago. And with the whole hoop house ordinance it's been going through, we were directed to hold back on our whole transition phase of building engineered greenhouses, which requires a lot of work into it. Definitely, in a year into it. And we were told by the county to hold back on it because this conversion would affect us. We'll come to find out in May right now, we're not in that conversion, and nobody gave us any kind of feedback letting us know, hey, you're not going to be included in this, or else I would have been doing the transition. I would have been, part of, doing all the requirements to go into that. And, due to the market and all that, that's why we held back, hoping that this was going to be, we were led to believe that this was going to help us out. And now it's not. So I asked, please at least give us an extension so we could comply, or else, we won't be able to do anything this season, and that will put us out. And and I'm one of the, I've been compliant. I've been in and out of the county this whole time through this 2 years. And you could ask anybody in the building and planning. I've been in and out of there, and that's what we were told through the county, the building, and now we're at this point, and we're not even at least given an extension that should go into consideration. So I ask you, please take it into consideration, because it will affect at least me and a few other farms that are trying.
That's not on the agenda today. That's not what we're discussing today. And was there a response from staff? No? Okay. You don't have to. If you want to.
For this applicant, the conversion was part of the project plan from the beginning. I remember doing the inspection on it in 2021, And we made note that they weren't in full compliance because they had not met the conversion at this point. They came and asked why, and that was the reason why. As far as other staff telling them to hold and do that, they had worked with a few other planners. I can't confirm or deny that, but it did not come from myself or our director. So
Okay, thank you. Did somebody unclick over here? No, okay. Did you have something to say? No? Supervisor Spatier?
And I feel like I convoluted the conversation. It was more of how does this ordinance of hoop house regulations impact those that were involved in the transition who had submitted plans and maybe weren't finished? Based on what I'm learning now, it sounds to me like they're all done except for those that have not done, finished their applications or had some other issues that didn't meet the requirements of the original ordinance to allow them that transition. So I'm good, and yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Ready for action.
Madam Chair, I move to adopt the ordinance amending Chapter 5.
Apologies. For this second reading of the ordinance, your board may just offer the ordinance
Oh.
with a roll call vote.
Thank you. I offer the ordinance. So much easier.
Supervisor Simon?
Yes.
Supervisor Sabatier?
Aye.
Supervisor Crandall? Supervisor Green?
Aye.
And Supervisor Pyska?
Yes.
Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, staff, for getting us to this point. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who gave input and volunteered all along the way. It's been a long, long process, and we're really grateful for the support throughout.